Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Rakoen Maertens. All right, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Dr. Rakoen Maertens. I am a research associate at the University of Cambridge, who is also a social psychologist. So I have a PhD in the psychology of persuasion and countering misinformation. And so this is my main branch of work on designing interventions, seeing if we can train people to recognize fake news, but also in general, how we can learn to measure susceptibility to misinformation.
So, why did you choose this career initially?
So it all starts with after high school. I had a wide range of interests, but many of them had something to do with human behavior. And I thought, why not go to really the core thing of understanding people and why they do things. And then it has this nice mix between some biology, but also some social science and everything in between. That's how I started with psychology. And then I was considering going into diplomacy or policy making. But then some people at the United Nations told me, you know what, why do you not apply psychology to help policymakers? Why do you not apply your skills to solve the world's problems? And that's how I got interested in using psychology to solve social problems. And that's how I found my way to this research group here in Cambridge, which was working at the time on climate change misinformation. And that's where I started as well. And I enjoyed it so much. And I found out that during PhD, you can do a lot of entrepreneurial projects, a lot of policy advising, a lot of other things on the side as well. It's not, in general, if you do research career, it's not set in stone what you're actually doing. And I like autonomy. I like leading my own projects. And I like to translate my impact into practical solutions. And you can actually do that in academia if you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really cool journey. So, and yeah, you kind of mentioned what your favorite part of doing what you do is. Yeah, what's your favorite part of doing what you do now?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part is putting that research into action, right, and seeing the impact. So I personally, I mean, I appreciate all the people who do like key theoretical work, which is very important. But my focus will always be on how can we make science really useful to solve the current problems. And I find it really super enjoyable and engaging and good to do to really see how I can put my research into action with some partners. So I've worked, for example, with Google. I've worked UK Cabinet Office on really finding ways to implement that research, and then seeing it implemented. It's just so fun. It's great because everyone cares about the topic you work. This is the thing, right? So everyone is friendly in general. People want to find solutions, and you really work together to solve a problem. And then I mean, it's research is messy, right? There's no perfect solutions, but the fact that actually you can do some research and then implement it with one of the partners in the field, and then see it out there, that's the most fun bit. That's what I enjoy most. It's a combination of a fun project coming to fruition and just the fun of that, and also making impact, and I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've been working with misinformation. So why do you think that truth is so important and um why do you think it's such a big issue, especially right now?
Yeah, so I never said truth is so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so I think there's an important thing here. I mean, yeah, obviously, truth is very important, and I think it is important, especially because if we don't have a joint vision on the world, if we don't have a common understanding of what is real and what is not, then it's very hard to construct a harmonious society, right? If you want to decide on the future of your country or of who to be friends with, but you believe you are in a fundamentally different world, and the laws of physics work differently for you, well, then it's very hard to do that, right? But so it's important that we have this, that we keep truth as an important factor, as a building block of our society. But I actually think that this is not the biggest problem. I think people still care about the truth, and they are still pretty good actually at dissecting information and finding out what is truthful and what is not. I think a bigger problem is that misinformation can lead to polarization and misunderstanding, and that sometimes people care about truth, but they might behave as if they have different views simply because of social identity kind of polarization. And I think this is where the bigger issue lies.
Yeah. Um, so then how do you or people like in your field try to like tackle or avoid misinformation?
Right. So there are many ways to do this, and there is no silver bullet solution, right? So we all want to solve the misinformation problem, but I think we have to be nuanced and a bit humble about what we can actually do. So first of all, what I want to say is we need a multi-layered defense system, right? So there's a framework that we often use in psychology. It's called pre-bunking and debunking. I also call it sometimes, I add a third term to that called co-bunking. Maybe I'm now launching it officially. But the idea is it's on a timeline. Imagine that in the middle, you get exposed to misinformation. You can do things before you get exposed to misinformation. You can train people to become more media literate. You can give them certain interventions that's called inoculation interventions. I'll get back to that in a bit. But you can train people to recognize misinformation before they fall into the trap. And then you can also do something while you are exposed to information. So that's what I call co-bunking. So you can give warning labels. You can teach people how to check sources and so on. You can use various ways to slow down your thinking. For example, if you share something on social media and it says, do you really want to share this? This might help to make you think about whether it's truthful or not. So that's what I call co-bunking. And then debunking is all about, okay, once the damage is done, how can we undo the damage? For example, maybe something has gone viral that is saying that something happened, but it didn't happen. You can craft very specific messages to kind of fix that misbelief after the damage is done. So that's pre-bunking, co-bunking, and debunking. And then obviously we need a lot of work on building trusts in media agencies. We need a lot of work on learning to communicate uncertainty and being a bit open-minded and intellectually humble. That's something in general I think we need to do more of. I can get back to that later. And then obviously we need to, and this is maybe the biggest elephant in the room, we need to change the way our social media platforms work and how we do media. We really need to think of new ways, especially in terms of algorithms. We're very bad at creating good algorithms that help to make society more harmonious. So I think the big work is really on there. So I think the pre-bunking, co-bunking, and debunking is the thing that we as psychologists focus on most. But I think actually the biggest impact can be made on the front of technological solutions and new types of algorithms. So that's in all honesty there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. So I understood the co-bunking part. Could you go into more detail or like a specific example of like the other two, like pre-bunking and debunking?
Yeah, of course. So the debunking one is simple. For example, if someone says the Earth is flat, right? There's a big movement of people who believe that. There are ways to actually prove that the Earth is not flat, right? Now, there are better and worse ways to do that. There is actually a handbook out there. We can really recommend it. It's called the Debunking Handbook. That explains how to do debunking efficiently. But yeah, so basically the scenario would be here. Someone is already infected by a misunderstanding, namely the Earth is flat. And I'm very wary, so I'll try to do that in this conversation. But in general, I would recommend anyone to never insult someone for any beliefs, because people believe things for sometimes very good reasons, and even something that might see as simple as as like, okay, the Earth is not flat. That is also something. Some people have really good reasons for why they believe that. It's much better to try to understand those people rather than to attack them. But yeah, so there are better ways to explain why the Earth is not flat, right? But it would be basically an explanation that that kind of includes some of the understandings the person already have, and then said like, look, if you do this kind of experiment, this proves why it's not flat, but you understand why this happens. So, but in an effective way, you correct the misunderstanding, and you can do this in a text message. You can do this in a video. You can really point towards the flaw in the thinking and then correct it. Okay. Now for the pre-bunking, that's something else. So there are many different ways to do this. So the approach we often use in my research group is called inoculation. And that has two components. One is you have to make people aware that there's misinformation on the topic we are talking about. And you have to have some kind of emotional alertness message where you say, look, you can be fooled. You have to be aware that you'll be vulnerable, that everyone is vulnerable to misinformation, and that misinformation might be out there on this topic. So that's the first thing. The second element is you need to craft a specific training, whether it's a message or a game or a video, that teaches people how to recognize misinformation that they haven't seen before. So that's the idea. So if you combine that warning message, if you might make people aware you are vulnerable yourself, and then you teach them how to recognize misinformation in the future, then what happens is whenever you get exposed to that misinformation, then the alarm bells will ring. You say, I recognize this. I was warned. I won't be fooled by this, right? So imagine you've never heard about the flat Earth theory, right? But we know that this is a problem, so we can craft a training that teaches people, look, there might be misinformation out there about whether the Earth is flat or not. Don't be fooled by it. This is how you can recognize the flaws in the reasoning, for example, right? And then when the person gets exposed to it, they'll be like, I recognize this message, I recognize the flaws, I won't be fooled by it. So that's pre-bunking or inoculation. You basically psychologically vaccinate someone against the misinformation.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I feel like in day-to-day life, you usually only hear about like debunking, like someone's debunking or like a myth. But yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's very important also. So what do you think is like the worst type of misinformation? Like misinformation about what?
Yeah, I think the worst type of information is misinformation is not necessarily a straightforward question to answer, because I think if we think about some recent big issues, for example, vaccines, or in UK you had Brexit. I don't know if you followed that from the US. What's interesting there is that I think more harmful, let's take the vaccine example because that's quite worldwide. So more harmful than anti-vax misinformation is misinformation from both sides that try to polarize society and sow distrust in institutions. So this is something we see by, for example, foreign interference as well, is that often fake news accounts come from both sides. And often they're actually not even by the people who are actually involved in the debates or the politics, but often they're like done by foreign interference or troll farms or people who have nefarious intentions for the country. And what often happens is they try to make it look like a debate is very polarized. They attack the other side, right? But it might be even the same people controlling the debate on both sides. It might be an artificially inflated, polarized debate, right? So, and I think these types of misinformation, which are not necessarily fully true or false, I think most of the misinformation is actually not necessarily black and white. It is misleading. You could say, for example, about the vaccines, look, vaccines are dangerous because people have died from it, right? So it is true, people have died from it, but saying that in that sentence makes it very is a very misleading statement, right? Because COVID is also dangerous. People have also died from it, right? It's you have to put things into perspective, and sometimes, yeah, so the misinformation that's out there is not necessarily easy to mark as true or false, but rather you can see it attacks a different group. You can see it sows distrust in democracy and society, and especially in key institutions or like voting and so on, right? So once you no longer trust how society works and the key institutions, society can collapse, and that's where the real danger lies. I think it's not the topic, it's not the specific message, but rather the way the social media is used these days to spread misleading and polarizing information.
Mm. Yeah. So, I think those were pretty much, you covered pretty much all the questions that I had. So is there anything else you would like to add before like some closing questions?
Yes. So what maybe the thing I want to add is that the most important variable I found in my research to be a predictor for resilience to misinformation is actually one that is quite surprising. It's not, for example, skepticism or trust in good sources, but rather something called actively open-minded thinking. What is actively open-minded thinking? It basically has a couple of components, but in a nutshell, it's about one, being open to opposing views and being willing to consider people from another side, from another social identity group that you would normally not agree with. Being able to consider that perspective
Mm-hmm.
is good for resilience. And the second one is also being a little bit intellectually humble is actually a good thing, knowing that you might be wrong, right? So if you're open for other perspectives and you know you might be wrong, you're a bit intellectually humble. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. And they're also not contrary to skepticism. You can have a healthy bit of skepticism. You can say like, look, I will not just believe anything. I will fact check things before I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different from saying like, I don't believe this and I won't even look at it. I won't even consider it, right? So I think we need both. We don't need to accept anything. We need to be open to listen and to consider it, but really properly consider it, even if it really doesn't agree with us. Um, but and then you have to be able to reject at the right time, but also accept at the right time. You have to be able to update your opinion with new viewpoints, and that's something people really struggle with. And also sometimes in society, we don't look enough at people that we care about in ways that we respect an update of their mindset. So, for example, leaders often are respected if they stick to their plan, right? But sometimes it's just good if a leader can just admit, like, okay, look, I got new evidence, I was wrong, and that's okay, right? So we need that social norm that it's okay to actually update your viewpoint, even if it's contrary to your own previous perspective. So that's actually one a key takeaway I want to give that I found in my recent research.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, Thank you for adding that. And so I just have like two more questions, just like for fun. So the first one is, what are some of your like inspirations? Like what inspires you? That's like a person, idea, book, anything.
Mm. Yeah, so I'm always inspired by anthropologists actually that are willing to really go out there and discover new perspectives, right? I think that's like I mean, you have different types of anthropologists, but it kind of reflects some kind of key value of like an explorer that also appreciates other perspectives, right? So it's a bit that open-minded thinking. And also, I mean, a person that's not necessarily an anthropologist, it's a fellow psychologist, but one that influenced my thinking a bit is Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a couple of books on his cross-cultural comparisons of morality and so on. And he does a lot of good work on diversifying the psychological research world by making sure there's like, for example, perspectives from multiple ideological viewpoints from multiple cultures and so on. And I respect that, and I think we need more of that.
Yeah. And do you have any advice for people, especially like teens, like about anything?
There's lots of advice to give, but I think the most important thing is immediately kind of do all the obvious things like fact checking and so on. But I think more important is actually be open to people you don't agree with. If you don't agree with someone, that's fine. You can be friends still. You can have completely diametrically opposite opinions, but try to be friends. And in the end, if you build trusting friendships with people you don't agree with, you will see that in the end, you will have more respect for each other's opinion and you will learn more from each other.
Mm. All right. Thank you for that. And thank you for this interview. It was really nice talking to you. And I heard some a lot of new things and a new perspective. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. And good luck with this channel. It's important work.
Thank you. Great. Take care.
Bye bye.